In Pompeii, in a house on a quiet street, a wealthy man decorates his floor with a mosaic. Not gods, not victories, not ancestors, jars, 4 of them, one in each corner of the room, each labeled with what it held. His name is Aulus Umbricius Scaurus, and he wants every guest who walks in to know exactly how the family made its money. He made it from rotting fish. Here's the thing about Roman luxury that nobody tells you. We assume luxury means refinement. Softer, cleaner, more pleasant than what ordinary people have. That's what the word means to us. It did not mean that in Rome. Roman luxury was priced by how much labor, time, and sheer unpleasantness went into producing it. And the unpleasantness was frequently the point. The most expensive things in the empire were, almost without exception, produced by letting something organic rot under controlled conditions for a very long time. At industrial scale, somewhere far enough away that the people buying it never had to smell the process. That's what you were actually paying for, not comfort. Proof that you could command that much work and that the rot happened to somebody else. 3 examples. Start with the fish. Garum was a fermented fish sauce, and it was on everything: meat, vegetables, eggs, other fish. It was mixed into wine. It was prescribed as medicine. It was the single most common flavoring in the Roman world. Here is how it was made. You take fish, often the guts, blood, and offcuts nobody else wanted. You layer them in a stone vat with a great deal of salt. Then you leave the vat open to the Mediterranean sun for weeks, sometimes months, while enzymes break the fish down into liquid. Then you strain it, bottle it, and pour it on dinner. The smell during production was severe enough that Roman towns pushed garum works outside the walls or down to the coast. This was a civilization with an extremely high tolerance for bad smells, and even they wouldn't have it indoors. And it was a luxury good, not a poor man's condiment. The best grades were traded across the whole Mediterranean and priced like fine wine. Scaurus built a fortune on it, and then advertised it on his floor. Now here's the part that should change how you think about all of this. Garum never died. Fermented fish sauce is the direct ancestor of Southeast Asian nam pla and Vietnamese nuoc mam. Worcestershire sauce is anchovy-based and works on exactly the same principle. On the Amalfi Coast, they still make colatura di alici, which is close enough to Roman garum to count as a survival rather than a revival. You have eaten this, probably this month. The Romans were right about garum. Controlled fermentation breaks proteins into glutamates, and glutamates are what savory tastes like. They found umami about 1,800 years before anyone had a word for it. Now the color. Tyrian purple was the most valuable dye in the ancient world. It was the color of emperors, restricted at various points by law to the imperial household. Wearing it without permission could be read as a claim on the throne. It came from a sea snail, specifically from a gland in the Murex snail, a tiny quantity per animal. Dyeing a single garment took thousands of them. By some estimates, well over 10,000. The snails had to be cracked open, the glands extracted, and the whole mass left to putrefy in vats for days before the dye would develop. The stench of a purple works was legendary. Dye houses were pushed to the edges of cities, downwind, the way you would cite a tannery. There are Roman references to the smell clinging to the finished cloth. So the most prestigious garment in the Roman world, the one that marked you as untouchable, the one an ordinary citizen could be executed for wearing, was produced in a facility that smelled like rotting shellfish, and arguably still carried a trace of it. The most powerful man alive wore clothes that smelled faintly of dead snails, and everyone agreed this was the height of civilization. They were right about the chemistry, at least. Murex dye didn't fade. That was the actual reason it was valuable. Every other purple in the ancient world washed out or turned brown in sunlight, and this one didn't. And then there is the Dormouse. Wealthy Romans kept them in a purpose-built terracotta jar called a glirarium, not a cage, a sealed pot with a lid, air holes, and a spiral ledge running around the inside so the animal could climb. The point of the darkness was that a dormouse in the dark thinks it is winter. It slows down, stops moving, and eats. So you kept it in permanent artificial night, fed it walnuts, chestnuts, and acorns, and let it fatten. At the table, dormice were weighed in front of the guests before cooking, so everyone could see how heavy yours were. Then they were roasted and served with honey and poppy seeds. And here's how you know it counted as an extravagance. In the 2nd century before Christ, Roman sumptuary law banned them. Along with imported wine and shellfish, dormice were legislated against as a symptom of moral decline. The ban did not work. Nothing about that surprises anyone who has ever tried to legislate a status symbol out of existence. But notice what banning it does. It confirms, in law, that eating one meant something. The prohibition is the advertisement. Before the close, a correction, because a lot of what you have heard about Roman excess is not evidence. If you know one thing about Roman feasts, it is probably something like flamingo tongues, or peacock brains, or an emperor smothering his dinner guests to death under rose petals. Nearly all of those stories come from one source, a collection of imperial biographies called the Historia Augusta. It is a late compilation, written well after the events it describes. It invents documents. It quotes letters that never existed. Modern historians treat large portions of it as effectively fiction, including most of the wilder material about the Emperor Elagabalus, which is where the rose petals and the tongues come from. Some of it may contain a kernel of truth. Most of it is a later writer producing entertainment about a dynasty everyone already agreed to despise. The Romans did enough genuinely strange things. They don't need the invented ones. So what connects fish guts, snail glands, and a mouse in a jar? Every one of them takes something ordinary and cheap, applies an enormous amount of labor and time to it, and produces something that cannot be faked or rushed. You cannot make quick garum. You cannot make a small batch of Tyrian purple. You cannot fatten a dormouse in an afternoon. That is what the Romans were buying. Not flavor, not color, not really even food. Proof of command over other people's time, and we have not stopped. The most expensive foods on earth are still overwhelmingly controlled rot. Aged cheese, cured ham, hung beef, wine, fish sauce. We still pay most for the things that take longest and smell worst in the middle of the process. The Romans were not being decadent. They were being consistent. They just did it with a mouse.